I'm 73 years old, and in 6 months, the cancer will finish what it started. My doctor says I should get my affairs in order, make peace, say my goodbyes. But there's something I need to do first. Something I've kept secret for 47 years. I need to tell you about the men I met, the stories they shared with me in their final days, and what those stories revealed about creatures we've spent centuries trying to prove exist. What I learned changed everything I thought I knew about Sasquatch, about human nature, and about the choices we make when we're faced with something that shouldn't be possible. My name is Robert Chen, and I'm a hospice chaplain, or I was until last year when my own diagnosis came. I've spent 35 years sitting at bedsides, holding hands, listening to confessions. I've heard it all. Affairs that lasted decades, crimes that went unpunished, secrets that families would never know. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what 5 different men told me in their final hours. 5 men who never knew each other, separated by decades and thousands of miles, but whose stories wove together into something that still keeps me awake at night. The first confession came in 1997. I was 47 years old, working at a hospice facility in Bellingham, Washington. It was late February, one of those gray Pacific Northwest days where the rain never quite stops and the sky never quite brightens. I'd been called to see a new patient, a man named Thomas Whitmore, who'd been admitted the day before with end-stage liver disease. He was 78 years old, no family, no visitors, just an old logger who'd spent his life in the forests of the Cascade Mountains. When I walked into his room that afternoon, Thomas was sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the rain. He was thin, almost skeletal, with liver-spotted hands that trembled slightly as they rested on the blanket. But his eyes were sharp, alert, and when he turned to look at me, I saw something there that made me pause. Not fear, exactly, more like urgency mixed with relief. "You're the chaplain," he said. His voice was rough, damaged by decades of cigarettes and whiskey. I nodded and introduced myself, asked if he wanted to talk. Maybe pray together. He shook his head. "Don't want to pray. Already made my peace with whatever's waiting, but I need to tell someone the truth before I go. Need someone to know what really happened up there in the mountains. Someone who won't think I'm crazy or try to profit from it." I pulled up a chair beside his bed. "I'm listening, Thomas. Whatever you need to share, it stays between us. That's a promise I can make." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right then. All right. What I'm about to tell you, you're going to want to walk out that door and forget you ever heard it. But I'm asking you to listen to the end. Can you do that for a dying man?" "I can do that," I said. Thomas took a deep, shaky breath and began to speak. What he told me over the next 3 hours would be the first of 5 confessions that would eventually connect in ways I never could have imagined. In 1951, Thomas said, I was 32 years old and working as a timber cruiser for Weyerhaeuser Company. That's someone who goes into the forests before the loggers arrive, surveying the trees, marking which ones to cut, estimating board feet. Lonely work, but I preferred it that way. Just me in the woods for weeks at a time. It was early September and I was working a section of forest about 40 miles northeast of Mount Baker. Old growth timber, some of those trees were 400 years old, 6 feet across at the base. Beautiful and terrible all at once, knowing we were going to cut them down. I'd set up my base camp near a creek, nice spot with good water and flat ground for my tent. The first week went like always. I'd head out at dawn with my compass and marking paint, work until the light failed, come back to camp exhausted. But on the 8th day, something changed. I woke up that morning to find my campsite had been disturbed. My food box, I kept it locked in a metal container, to keep bears out had been moved about 10 feet from where I'd left it. Not opened, just moved. The lock was still intact, but something had picked up that 100-pound box and relocated it like it weighed nothing. I checked for bear tracks, found prints instead that made the hair on my neck stand up. They were humanoid, but massive. 17 inches long, maybe more. 5 toes clearly visible in the mud near the creek. The stride between prints was over 6 feet. I'd seen bear tracks my whole life, knew them like I knew my own face. These weren't bear tracks. Thomas paused, his breathing labored. A nurse came in to adjust his oxygen, and he waved her away impatiently. I'm fine, just let me finish." When she left, he continued, "I should have packed up and left right then. That's what any sane person would have done. But I was young and stubborn, and I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe it was other timber cruisers playing a prank. Maybe I'd moved the food box myself and forgot. So I stayed. That night, I heard it for the first time. A vocalization that came from deep in the forest, maybe half a mile away. It started low, almost like a growl, then rose into something that sounded almost human, but not quite. Like someone trying to speak with a throat that wasn't built for words. The sound echoed through the trees, and every small noise in the forest went silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing. Just that call, and then crushing silence. I sat in my tent with my rifle across my lap, not sleeping, just listening. The call came again around 2 in the morning, closer this time, maybe a quarter mile. I could hear something large moving through the underbrush, branches snapping under substantial weight. Whatever it was circling my camp. By dawn, I'd convinced myself to leave. Pack up, report back to the company, tell them the area wasn't suitable for logging. But when I stepped out of my tent that morning, I found an offering. An offering, I repeated. What do you mean? Thomas's eyes were distant, seeing something 46 years in the past. On a flat rock near my campfire, someone or something had arranged a pile of food. Mushrooms, I recognized them as chanterelles, perfectly edible. A dozen or so fish looked like trout, gutted and cleaned, and a cluster of huckleberries on a branch, the berries still fresh. It wasn't random. The arrangement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. And there were those tracks again, all around my camp, circling the tent, approaching the rock where the food had been left. Something had been watching me while I cowered in my tent. Something that could have hurt me, but instead brought me food. Thomas paused, his breathing shallow. I remember standing there in the cold morning air, mist rising off the creek, looking at those offerings and feeling something I'd never felt before. Not fear, not anymore. Wonder, pure wonder. The mushrooms were arranged in a perfect spiral. The fish were laid side by side like they'd been placed by careful hands, and the huckleberry branch was positioned so the berries faced toward my tent. Whoever left this wanted me to see it, wanted me to understand it was intentional. I knelt down and examined the rock more closely. There were no claw marks, no signs of an animal's mouth or teeth. The fish had been cleaned with precision, probably with a sharp stone or piece of bark. The cuts were clean, purposeful, and the whole arrangement, it reminded me of something my mother used to do when I was a child. She'd arrange food on a platter for Sunday dinners, making it beautiful before we ate. This felt the same. This was presentation, care, an offering made with thought and intention. The morning sun was filtering through the Douglas firs, creating shafts of golden light that cut through the mist. Birds had started singing again, the forest coming back to life after the silence of the night. And I realized something that changed everything. Whatever had been circling my camp, whatever had brought me this food, it had waited until dawn to leave. It could have approached while I slept, could have done anything, but it had waited for the safety of daylight, for a time when I might see the gift and understand it was meant kindly. My hands were shaking as I picked up one of the mushrooms. The chanterelle was perfect, golden yellow, the kind my grandmother used to collect in the forests of Oregon. It smelled earthy and clean, and I knew without question it was safe to eat. Whoever brought this knew which mushrooms were edible and which were poison. They knew how to fish, how to clean them properly. They knew what humans could eat, what we needed. This wasn't just an offering, it was knowledge, demonstration of understanding about my species and my needs. I looked at those offerings for a long time. Then I did something that would change the rest of my life. I spoke out loud. "Thank you. I don't know if you can understand me, but thank you. This is kind, and I appreciate it." Nothing happened at first. The forest stayed quiet. But then from maybe 50 yards into the tree line, I heard a response. Not the vocalization from the night before. Something softer, shorter, almost like acknowledgement. And that's when I saw it. Just for a moment, between two massive cedars. It was standing upright, had to be 8 feet tall, maybe taller, covered in dark reddish-brown hair that caught the early morning light. The face was in shadow, but I could see the general shape. Flat, broad, with a pronounced brow ridge. The shoulders were impossibly wide, and the arms hung down almost to the knees. We looked at each other across that clearing. I was frozen, couldn't have moved if I wanted to. Every muscle in my body had locked up, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was recognition. I was looking at something that looked back with eyes that held intelligence, curiosity, and something else. Something that looked almost like hope. Thomas's voice cracked slightly. I'd seen bears stand up before. I'd seen elk and moose, massive animals that could kill a man without trying. But this was different. The way it stood wasn't like a bear on hind legs, awkward and temporary. This creature was meant to stand upright. Its posture was natural, balanced, comfortable. The knees were bent slightly. The spine was straight. The head was held level. It was a biped, evolved for walking on 2 legs, just like humans. And the way it was looking at me, Robert, I'll never forget it. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was assessment, evaluation. It was watching to see what I would do, how I would react. There was caution there, yes, but also something warmer. It had brought me food. It had offered kindness. And now it was waiting to see if I was capable of understanding that gesture. The morning breeze shifted, and I caught its scent. Not the foul odor I'd smelled the night before, but something different. Musky, yes, but natural, like wet fur and forest loam and wood smoke. Not unpleasant, just different. Wild in a way that reminded me of being near wild horses or elk, that smell of something that belonged completely to nature. We stood there for maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like hours. The sun continued to rise, the mist continued to burn off, and somewhere in the distance, a raven called out. Normal forest sounds returning, as if the world was saying this moment was acceptable, was meant to happen. And then it did something I'll never forget. It raised one hand, palm forward, fingers spread, a gesture of peace, or maybe greeting. The movement was slow, deliberate, non-threatening, and I understood with absolute certainty that this was communication. This being had learned, somehow, that humans use hand gestures to convey meaning. It had watched us, studied us, and was now trying to speak to me in a way I might understand. My throat was dry, my heart hammering, but I managed to raise my own hand, copied the gesture, palm forward, fingers spread, and I saw its posture change slightly. The shoulders relaxed, the head tilted just a bit. If I didn't know better, I'd have said it looked relieved. Then it turned and walked deeper into the forest, moving with a fluid grace that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. Its feet barely made a sound on the forest floor. It didn't crash through the underbrush like a bear would. It moved like it was part of the forest itself, like it knew every branch and root and stone by heart. Within seconds, it had disappeared completely, leaving nothing but those massive footprints and the offerings on the rock. I stood there trembling, not from cold, but from the enormity of what had just happened. I'd just had first contact with something science said didn't exist, and it hadn't been violent or terrifying. It had been gentle, cautious, and oddly familiar, like meeting a distant cousin who spoke a different language but shared the same blood. Thomas stopped talking, and I could see tears running down his weathered cheeks. "You stayed, didn't you?" I said quietly. "You didn't leave." He nodded. I stayed for 3 more weeks. Every day I'd find small gifts near my camp, berries, roots, once a piece of honeycomb wrapped in leaves. And every evening, just after sunset, it would come to the edge of the clearing, never closer than 50 yards at first, but close enough that I could see it clearly. It was male, I'm pretty sure. Massive build, probably weighed 700 or 800 pounds. But gentle, Robert. So gentle. He'd sit on his haunches and just watch me as I ate dinner by my fire. Sometimes he'd make soft sounds, almost like he was talking to himself. I started talking back, telling him about my day, about the trees I'd marked, about my life before the forest. I know how it sounds. Crazy old man, liver-diseased brain making up stories. But I swear on my mother's grave, every word is true. By the end of the second week, he was coming within 30 feet of my camp. I could see details I'll never forget. The way his hands moved, almost human but longer fingers, thicker knuckles. The expressions on his face, curiosity, caution, something that looked like loneliness. "What happened then?" I asked. "How did it end?" Thomas's breathing grew more labored. On the 21st day, a Saturday, I heard gunshots. Not near my camp, but close enough, maybe 2 miles north. Hunting season hadn't started yet, so it was poachers. I heard 3 shots, then nothing. That evening, my friend, that's what I'd started calling him in my head. He didn't come to the clearing. I waited until dark. No sign of him. I went to bed worried, and somewhere around midnight, I heard something dragging through the forest. Heavy, labored breathing. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and went outside. He was there, collapsed at the edge of my camp. He'd been shot. I could see the wound in his left shoulder, blood matting the fur. He'd dragged himself, must have been miles, back to my camp. Back to the one human he thought might help him. I dropped the rifle and ran to him. He was conscious, those brown eyes looking at me with such pain and trust. I didn't think, just acted. I had a first aid kit, basic supplies. I boiled water on my fire, tore up my spare shirt for bandages. The wound had gone clean through, which was lucky. The bullet hadn't lodged inside. I worked on him for hours. He never made a sound, never tried to hurt me, even though I knew the pain had to be excruciating. I cleaned the wound, packed it with moss like my grandfather had taught me for deep cuts, wrapped it as tight as I could. Then I gave him water from my canteen, and he drank it like he'd been dying of thirst. He stayed in my camp for 6 days. I fed him everything I had, went without eating myself most of the time so he'd have enough. I changed his dressings twice a day and watched the wound slowly start to heal. And during those 6 days, something extraordinary happened. We communicated. Not with words, Thomas said. He couldn't make the sounds for human speech, and I couldn't make the sounds for his language. But we found other ways. Gestures, drawings in the dirt, pointing at things and making sounds until we understood each other's meaning. He taught me which plants in the forest were medicinal, which ones could kill you. He showed me how to find water when there was no obvious stream, how to read the forest in ways I'd never learned, and he told me as best he could about his people. There were others scattered through these mountains, families, small groups living in the deepest, most remote areas. They avoided humans because of what had happened to him, because every encounter with humans ended in violence or death. They watched us from the shadows, learning our languages, understanding our ways, but never revealing themselves. Survival meant invisibility. Thomas's voice grew softer, more reflective. On the third day, when his fever finally broke and the wound started showing signs of real healing, he became more animated, more willing to share. He'd point at the sky and make sounds, different sounds for sun and moon and stars. He'd point at animals when we heard them in the forest, making distinct vocalizations for each one. Deer had one sound, bear had another, eagle had a third. It wasn't just mimicry, it was language, proper language with consistent sounds for consistent meanings. I started teaching him too. I'd point at my camp stove and say, "Fire." He'd try to repeat it, but his throat couldn't quite make the sounds. So instead, he'd make his own sound for fire and I'd learn his word. We were creating a shared vocabulary, a pidgin language that belonged to both of us. On the fourth day, he drew pictures in the dirt, his people. He drew large figures and small figures, adults and children. He pointed to himself, then drew a female figure and two smaller ones. Family. He had a family out there somewhere, a mate and children who probably thought he was dead. And seeing the sadness in his eyes when he drew those figures, I understood something profound. This being felt love, felt loss, felt longing for the ones he'd been separated from. He also drew maps, rough but clear. He showed me where his people lived, pointing to the highest peaks of the Cascades, the most remote valleys, places no logging company had reached yet, places that might stay safe if I could convince my employers the timber wasn't worth the effort. And I understood that he was trusting me with information that could destroy his people. He was trusting me because I'd shown him kindness when he was dying, because I'd chosen healing over fear. The bond we formed in those 6 days was something I can't fully explain, Robert. I've had dogs I loved, horses I trusted, a wife I cherished for 40 years before she passed. But this was different. This was connection across species, across the boundary of what I thought was possible. We couldn't speak the same language, but we understood each other. We couldn't share the same world, but we shared compassion. And when he finally left, when he was strong enough to return to his people, it felt like saying goodbye to a brother I'd just met and would never see again. On the 7th day, he was strong enough to leave. I woke up that morning and he was standing at the edge of camp, testing his injured shoulder. He looked at me for a long time, and then he did something that still breaks my heart. He walked over to where I was sitting, knelt down so we were at eye level, and he placed one massive hand on my chest, right over my heart. Then he touched his own chest. It was clear what he meant: brother, friend, family. Then he stood up, gave me that palm forward gesture one last time, and walked into the forest. I never saw him again. Thomas wiped his eyes with a trembling hand. I finished my survey work, went back to the company and lied in my report. Told them the timber wasn't good quality, too much rot, not worth the expense of logging. They believed me, and that section of forest was left alone. For all I know, it's still standing today. But I kept the secret, Robert. For 46 years, I kept it. Never told my wife, God rest her soul. Never told my children. Never told anyone until right now. And you know why? Because the look in his eyes when he touched my chest wasn't just gratitude. It was a plea to protect his people by staying silent, and I honored that. He closed his eyes, exhausted. But now I'm dying, and I need someone to know. Not to expose them, not to bring hunters or scientists or curiosity seekers, just to know that they're real, that they're out there, and that maybe, just maybe, they deserve to be left alone. Can you do that? Can you just know and keep it to yourself? I promised him I would. Thomas Whitmore died 2 days later, peaceful, his secret finally shared. I held his hand as he passed, and his last words were, "Thank you, brother." I like to think he was talking to me, but maybe he was talking to someone else, someone who'd saved his life 46 years earlier by teaching him the value of kindness across species. I thought Thomas's confession would be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, the kind of deathbed story that hospice workers occasionally hear, but never quite believe. I filed it away in my memory, honored his request for silence, and moved on with my work. But then, 8 years later, in 2005, I heard the second confession. And that's when I started to realize there was a pattern, a connection between these stories that went deeper than coincidence. I was working at a different facility by then, Providence Mount St. Vincent in Seattle. It was late October and the fall rain had set in hard, turning the world gray and wet. I'd been assigned to a patient named Malcolm Pierce, 67 years old, dying of emphysema after a lifetime of smoking. He'd been a wildlife photographer, the kind who disappeared into the wilderness for months at a time, coming back with stunning images of bears, wolves, eagles. Malcolm's room was filled with framed photographs from his career: grizzlies fishing for salmon, mountain goats on impossible cliff faces, a wolf pack moving through snow. Beautiful work, the kind that made you feel like you were standing right there in the wild. But there was one photo that caught my attention. It was turned face down on his bedside table, and when I asked about it, Malcolm's expression changed. "Turn it over," he said, his voice a wheeze through oxygen-supplemented breaths. "But promise me first. Promise me you won't tell anyone what you see." I made the promise, and I turned over the photograph. What I saw made my breath catch. It was a forest scene, thick with Douglas fir and western hemlock. But in the mid-ground, partially obscured by foliage, was a figure. Tall, covered in dark hair, standing upright. The quality was extraordinary, much clearer than any Bigfoot photo I'd ever seen in tabloids. You could see the texture of the hair, the structure of the face, the intelligence in the eyes. "When did you take this?" I asked. 1973, Malcolm said. "I was 35 years old, working on a National Geographic assignment in the North Cascades. August, beautiful time of year. I'd been tracking a family of black bears trying to get shots of the cubs. I'd set up my tent near a place called Ross Lake, remote area. Hardly anyone ever went there. I'd been there about a week when I started noticing things. My camp was being watched. I could feel it. You know how you can sense when eyes are on you? I'd turn around quickly, trying to catch whoever it was, but I never saw anything. Just that feeling of being observed. One morning, I found a gift outside my tent. A perfect eagle feather, one of the big tail feathers. It was placed deliberately on a flat rock, weighted down with a smaller stone so it wouldn't blow away. That's not normal animal behavior. Animals don't leave gifts. People do. I felt a chill, the same pattern as Thomas's story, the watching, the offerings. "Malcolm, did you see who left it?" He nodded slowly. "I set up a motion-activated camera that night, one of the old film cameras with a remote trigger, positioned it to cover the area around my tent. Then I went to bed, pretended to sleep, and waited. Around 2 in the morning, the camera clicked. I heard it through the tent wall. I waited another few minutes, heart pounding, then grabbed my regular camera and stepped outside. And there it was, standing not 20 feet from my tent, looking right at me. Malcolm's breathing grew more labored, and I adjusted his oxygen before he continued. It was female, I'm almost certain. Shorter than the males I'd seen in books, maybe 7 feet tall. Lighter colored fur, more brown than black. And Robert, she had an infant with her. A baby, couldn't have been more than a year old, clinging to her chest. We stared at each other. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. There was something in her posture, in the way she held that baby, that was so fundamentally human it bypassed fear and went straight to recognition. She was a mother showing her child something new, something curious, teaching it about the world. I slowly raised my camera. She didn't move, didn't react. I took one photo, just one, and the flash went off. The picture you're holding. Then I lowered the camera and did something that felt natural in the moment, but seemed crazy later. I held up my hand, palm forward, just like she was standing with her hand slightly raised, a gesture of peace. She tilted her head, studying me. Then she made a sound, soft and low, almost like a purr. The infant mimicked it, and then she did something that still amazes me. She reached down, picked up a pine cone from the ground, and gently tossed it toward me. It landed at my feet. Not a threat, an offering, an exchange. I picked up the pine cone, held it up so she could see I accepted it. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only thing I had that seemed appropriate, a granola bar, still wrapped. I placed it on the same rock where the eagle feather had been. She watched me do this, then nodded, an actual nod, clear and unmistakable. She retrieved the granola bar, examined it, smelled it. Then she turned and walked into the forest, the infant's eyes watching me over her shoulder until they disappeared into the darkness. Did she come back? I asked. Malcolm smiled, though it quickly turned into a coughing fit. Every night for the next 2 weeks, we established a routine. I'd leave food, nothing processed after that first granola bar. I learned fast that their systems can't handle preservatives, fresh fish, berries, nuts, vegetables from my supplies, and she'd leave gifts. Feathers, interesting rocks, once a perfect piece of obsidian that must have come from miles away. But it was more than just exchanges. We communicated. She'd sit at the edge of my camp, the baby playing nearby, and she'd watch me work. I'd talk to her while I cleaned my cameras, organized my photos. I'd show her pictures I'd taken, and I swear she understood what she was looking at. She'd point at images of animals, make sounds that might have been their names in her language. The baby was curious, kept trying to come closer. A few times it got within 10 feet of me before the mother would call it back. But she never seemed angry about it, more like a parent teaching caution. Be careful, don't trust too quickly. And one night she brought others. An older male, massive, had to be 8.5 feet tall, and 2 juveniles, probably her older children. They stayed back in the trees, but they watched. She was introducing me to her family, showing them that not all humans were dangerous. Malcolm's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That's when I understood the weight of what I'd been given. This wasn't just a wildlife encounter. This was first contact with another intelligent species. These beings had language, family structures, culture. They were teaching their young, caring for their elders, living complex lives in the shadows of our world, and they'd chosen to reveal themselves to me. What happened then? His expression darkened. Hunters happened. 2 weeks into my stay, I heard gunshots to the south. Illegal hunting had to be. It was outside season, and we were in a protected area. I heard the shots, maybe 6 or 7 of them, then men's voices laughing and congratulating each other. That evening, my friend didn't come to the clearing, neither did her family. I waited until dark, then went to investigate. Followed the sound of the shots. Malcolm stopped, and I could see tears forming in his eyes. I found them 2 miles south. 3 men from a logging camp, drunk, standing around a kill. They'd shot the big male, her mate, I think. He was lying on the ground, and they were taking pictures with him, posing like he was a trophy deer. I lost it, Robert. I'm not proud of what I did, but I lost it. I started screaming at them, told them they'd murdered someone's husband, someone's father. They laughed at me, called me crazy, said it was just an animal, not even a real animal, something that shouldn't exist. I reported it to the park rangers, but what could they do? These men claimed they thought it was a bear. No law against shooting an unknown creature, is there? They walked away free, and I never saw my friend again. She and her family disappeared, probably went deeper into the wilderness, where humans couldn't reach them. I packed up my camp the next day and left. Finished my National Geographic assignment with lies and partial truths. Never mentioned what I'd really seen. And I kept this photograph hidden for 32 years because the world doesn't deserve to know about them. We had our chance, and we chose violence. We always choose violence. Malcolm died 3 days later. His last words were, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I think he was apologizing to her, wherever she was. Apologizing for his species. 2 confessions, 8 years apart. 2 men who'd experienced something extraordinary and kept it secret out of respect and grief. I still wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe dying men's minds created similar fantasies. But the details were too consistent, too specific. The offerings, the communication, the gentleness of these supposed monsters. Then came the 3rd confession, and with it, a piece of the puzzle I hadn't expected. It was 2012. I was 59 years old and working at Evergreen Hospice in Kirkland. June, warm and bright, the kind of Seattle summer where everyone pretends the rain never happens. My patient was a man named David Ortiz, 71, dying of pancreatic cancer. He'd been a park ranger for 33 years, worked all over the Pacific Northwest, but spent most of his career in Olympic National Park. David was quiet, kept to himself. His adult children visited regularly, loving but clearly mystified by their father's silence about his life. He'd been a ranger, he'd worked in the parks, but he never told stories, never shared what he'd seen. His daughter mentioned this to me one afternoon. "It's like Dad's whole career is classified," she said. "We've asked him 1,000,000 times to tell us about his work, but he just changes the subject." I found my opening a few days later when David and I were alone. His pain medication had been increased, and he was in that twilight state where inhibitions loosen. "You've kept secrets a long time," I said gently. "Would it help to share some of them before you go?" He looked at me with eyes that were sharp, despite the morphine. "What makes you think I have secrets? 33 years as a park ranger, and you never tell your children a single story." "That's not privacy, David. That's protection. You're protecting them from something." His expression shifted, and for a moment I thought he'd shut down. But instead he said, "What do you know about the 1982 incident in Olympic National Park?" I shook my head. "Nothing." "What incident?" "Exactly," he said. "Nothing. Because it's been buried, classified, hidden away where no one would ever find it." "But I was there, Robert. I was one of 3 rangers who responded. And what we found changed everything." He settled back into his pillows, eyes distant. It was late September 1982. A family had gone camping in the Hoh Rainforest area, deep in the park. The Hendersons, father, mother, teenage son. They'd been out for 4 days when the mother came running into the ranger station, hysterical. She said they'd been attacked, said her husband was injured, her son was missing, and something impossible had happened. We mobilized immediately, me and 2 other rangers, plus a search and rescue team. The mother led us back to their campsite, took us about 3 hours of hiking, and Robert, when we got there, we found something that would sound insane if I told anyone but a hospice chaplain about to take the story to his grave. The campsite was demolished, tent collapsed, gear scattered, cooler torn open. And sitting in the middle of it all was Mr. Henderson with a broken arm and a creature, a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, and it was trying to help him. I stared at David, trying to process what he'd just said. A Bigfoot was helping an injured man? David nodded slowly. "I know how it sounds. Trust me, I spent the next 30 years questioning my own sanity. But there were 6 witnesses, Robert. 6 of us saw the same thing. We couldn't all be hallucinating." He took a labored breath and continued. "When we arrived at the campsite, the creature was kneeling beside Mr. Henderson. It had fashioned a splint for his broken arm using straight branches and strips of bark, wrapped so carefully it looked almost professional. The mother was standing about 20 feet away, and she was crying, but not from fear, from relief. One of the other rangers, young guy named Peters, immediately drew his weapon. I stopped him. "Put the gun away," I said. "Look at what it's doing. It's not attacking, it's helping." The creature heard my voice and turned to look at us. Male, I think. Maybe 7.5 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur. And its eyes, Robert, they were intelligent, not animal eyes. Human eyes in a non-human face. It looked at us, looked at the injured man, then made a soft vocalization, almost like it was asking for help. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. "Please don't shoot it," she said. "It saved my husband's life, saved all of us." We lowered our weapons and approached slowly. The creature didn't move, just watched us with those careful, intelligent eyes. When we got close enough, I could see it had done more than just splint the arm. It had packed the man's other injuries, several deep cuts, with moss and some kind of plant material. Later, we identified it as yarrow, which has natural antiseptic and coagulant properties. This being new wilderness medicine, better than most doctors' new modern medicine. "What happened to them?" I asked. "How did they get injured?" David's expression darkened. That's the part that made everything worse. Mrs. Henderson told us they'd been hiking off trail, against park regulations, but people do it anyway. They'd encountered a mother grizzly with cubs. The bear had charged, knocked Mr. Henderson down, clawed him pretty badly. The teenage son, trying to protect his father, threw rocks at the bear. Bad move. The bear turned on him and he ran. She chased him into the forest. The parents were certain he was dead. Mrs. Henderson was trying to help her husband when the creature appeared. She said it looked at the situation, seemed to understand what had happened, then disappeared into the forest following the same direction the bear had taken their son. They waited for 2 hours, sure their boy was gone. And then the creature came back, carrying the teenager. He was unconscious, had a head wound and some deep scratches, but he was alive. The creature had found him, driven off the bear somehow, and brought him back to his parents. Then it started treating their injuries, used plants and moss, made the splint, even brought them water in a piece of bark, folded like a cup. It stayed with them through the night, keeping watch. And when dawn came and Mrs. Henderson hiked out to get help, it stayed with the father and son until we arrived. I felt chills running down my spine. What did you do? What could we do? David's voice was bitter. We treated the family, got them stabilized, radioed for a medical evacuation helicopter. The whole time, the creature stayed nearby. It wouldn't leave until it saw them being taken care of properly. And then, when the helicopter arrived and the family was loaded on, it just melted back into the forest. Didn't want recognition, didn't want thanks, just wanted to make sure they were safe. We filed our reports, all 6 of us, detailed accounts of what we'd seen. And you know what happened? The reports were confiscated. We were told, not asked, told, that we'd misidentified a bear, that the stress of the situation had caused us to see things that weren't there. We were ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements, threatened with losing our pensions if we ever spoke about it publicly. But 6 people, David emphasized, 6 trained park rangers and search and rescue personnel, all saw the same thing, all confirmed the same details, and we were told to pretend it never happened. That's when I understood these beings aren't unknown to the government. They're protected by secrecy, but not the kind of protection they deserve. It's the secrecy of denial, of maintaining comfortable lies. Did you ever see another one? 3 more times over my career, he said. Always at a distance, always watching. Once I found a child who'd wandered away from a campground. She was 5 years old, been missing for 8 hours in the wilderness. We found her asleep under a tree, completely unharmed. covered with a blanket of woven cedar bark. The parents said she didn't have a blanket when she wandered off. Something, had kept that child warm through a cold night and then disappeared before we arrived. Another time, we had a wildfire, big one, threatening to cut off a group of hikers. We were trying to evacuate them when we heard these vocalizations, loud, carrying, coming from multiple directions. The hikers followed the sounds thinking it was rescue personnel, and it led them right to safety, away from the fire. When we arrived, there were massive footprints all around the area. They'd been herded to safety by beings we don't acknowledge exist. David's breathing grew more labored, and I adjusted his oxygen. Why did they stay hidden? I asked. If they're intelligent, if they help humans, why not reveal themselves? Because of what happens when they do, David said simply. Because they know what we are, Robert. They've watched us for thousands of years. They've seen us kill everything we don't understand, exploit everything we do understand. Why would they trust us? The 1982 incident should have changed everything, should have led to protection, to recognition. Instead, it led to cover-ups and threats. He closed his eyes. My children asked me for stories. I wanted to tell them, wanted to share the wonder of what I'd seen. But I couldn't. Because the moment those stories enter the world, people will go hunting, trophy hunters, scientists, curiosity seekers. They'll turn the wilderness into a circus, and these beings will disappear forever. Better they live in myth than die in reality. David Ortiz passed away 5 days later. His family never learned the real stories from his career. Sometimes protection means silence, even from the ones you love most. 3 confessions down, and a pattern was emerging that I could no longer deny. These beings were real. They were intelligent, they were compassionate, and they were trying desperately to stay hidden from us. But there were 2 more confessions to come, and they would reveal something even more disturbing about the relationship between humans and Sasquatch. The 4th confession came in 2016. I was 66 years old, dealing with my own health issues, but still working part-time at a hospice in Tacoma. September, the air just starting to turn crisp with the promise of autumn. My patient was a man named Raymond Blackburn, 83 years old, dying of congestive heart failure. Raymond had been a wildlife biologist, spent his career studying predator-prey relationships in the Cascade ecosystem. Wolves, cougars, bears, their impact on deer and elk populations. Respected researcher, published papers, the kind of scientist whose work actually influenced conservation policy. But like the others, he had a secret he'd never shared with the scientific community. I'd been seeing Raymond for about a week when he asked me a strange question. Robert, do you believe in scientific integrity? Of course, I said. Why do you ask? Because I violated it, he replied. 54 years ago, I saw something that should have been the most important discovery of my career, and I buried it, hid the evidence, falsified my research data, and I did it deliberately because I believed it was the right thing to do. He gestured to a locked drawer in his bedside table. The key is in my wallet. Open it. There's a journal inside, leather-bound. Bring it to me. I retrieved the journal. It was old, worn, the leather cracked with age. Raymond took it with trembling hands and opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon. 1962, he said. I was 29 years old, fresh out of graduate school, working on my dissertation about apex predator territories. I'd been given a grant to study a wolf pack in the North Cascades, tracking their movements, documenting their hunting patterns, understanding their range. I spent that whole summer in the wilderness, July through September, just me and my equipment. Radio collars on the wolves, observation posts, meticulous notes. It was good work, important work. And then, in late August, something happened that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I was tracking the pack one evening, following their radio signals. They'd taken down an elk earlier in the day, and I wanted to observe their feeding behavior. But when I got to the kill site, the wolves were gone. The elk carcass was there, fresh, but the pack had abandoned it. That's unusual behavior. Wolves don't leave food. Then I heard it, a vocalization I'd never heard before coming from the trees above the kill site. Not wolves, not any animal I could identify. And then I saw them. There were 4 of them, Raymond said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. 2 adults, 2 juveniles. They were in the trees about 30 feet up, watching the elk carcass. And Robert, they were working together with a coordination and intelligence that took my breath away. One of the adults, the larger one, descended from the tree and approached the elk. It examined the carcass, then made a series of sounds to the others. They responded. It was clearly communication, complex communication. Then it began to butcher the elk. I watched through my binoculars as this creature used a sharp rock to cut the meat, separating it into portions. It wasn't random, it was systematic, methodical. It was dividing the meat into 4 roughly equal shares. Then it called the others down. The juveniles came first, hesitant, watching the tree line for danger. The adults guided them, teaching them. I could see the interaction, the parent showing the young one how to properly cut meat, how to carry it. This wasn't just scavenging. This was education, cultural transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next. Raymond opened his journal and showed me sketches, detailed drawings of the creatures, anatomically precise, with measurements and notes. They were Sasquatch, unmistakable, and the drawings were accompanied by pages of behavioral observations, written in the tight, precise handwriting of a trained scientist. I documented everything, he said. 3 hours of observation. I watched them divide the meat, cache portions in the trees for later, even saw them wash their hands and faces in a nearby stream afterwards. Hygiene, behavior, Robert. These weren't animals, they were people. I had photographic evidence too, black and white photos, dozens of them. Clear, indisputable documentation of an unknown primate species in North America. This was my chance, my opportunity to make history, to be the scientist who proved Sasquatch was real. What stopped you? I asked. The juveniles, he said simply. I kept watching them, studying their behavior, and I realized they were learning, not just mimicking, truly learning, absorbing information, asking questions through their vocalizations, practicing skills under adult supervision. They had culture, Robert. They had family structures and education and knowledge passed down through generations. And I understood that if I published my findings, if I revealed these beings to the world, I would be destroying them. Scientists would want to capture them, study them, dissect them. Hunters would want to kill them for trophies. Governments would want to control them. Their peaceful existence would end, replaced by life in laboratories or extinction at human hands. So, you buried it? Raymond nodded. I burned the photographs. I removed all mention of them from my field notes. I completed my wolf research and published my dissertation without a single word about what I'd really seen. And I've kept that secret for 54 years. He turned pages in the journal, showing me more observations. But I didn't stop studying them, he said. I just did it secretly. Over the next 40 years, I saw them 17 more times. Always careful to keep my distance, never interfering, just observing. And every observation confirmed what I'd seen that first day. These beings have language, use tools, teach their young, show compassion, demonstrate problem-solving intelligence. They're not missing links. They're a parallel branch of human evolution that survived by staying hidden. Raymond's eyes filled with tears. And they're dying out, Robert. In 1962, I estimated there were maybe 200 in the Cascades alone. By 2000, I'd put the number at less than 70. Habitat destruction, climate change, inbreeding from small, isolated populations. They're going extinct while we argue about whether they even exist. I should have published my research, should have fought for protections, for recognition. But I was afraid that exposure would accelerate their extinction rather than prevent it. And now I'll die not knowing if I made the right choice. Was there evidence? I asked. Besides the journal? He pointed to the drawer again. There's a USB drive in there. Digital files protected by encryption, photos I took with modern equipment in later years, video footage, audio recordings of their vocalizations, DNA samples I collected from hair and scat, analyzed privately by a friend in genetics who owed me favors. It's all there, proof beyond any reasonable doubt. And when you die, what happens to it? Raymond looked at me intently. That's what I need from you, Robert. I need you to decide. The encryption key is in the journal. You can unlock the files, release them to the world, let scientists fight over the revelation, or you can destroy it all. Let the secret die with me and hope that their obscurity is their salvation. I don't know if I can make that choice, I said. Someone has to, Raymond replied. I'm making it yours because you're a hospice chaplain. You understand the weight of secrets. You understand that sometimes the kindest thing is silence. Decide for me, Robert. Decide for them. Raymond Blackburn died 3 days later. His journal and the USB drive were given to me per his will. I still have them, locked in a safe deposit box. I've never opened the digital files. I've never decrypted them, because after I heard the fifth and final confession, I understood that some secrets have to remain secrets, not because the truth isn't important, but because the truth is too important to risk. The final confession came just 8 months ago, February 2023. By then, I was 73 and had received my own terminal diagnosis, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the same disease that had killed David Ortiz. I'd stopped working, was preparing for my own end, when I got a call from a former colleague at a hospice facility in Bellingham. Robert, she said, I have a patient asking for you specifically. He says you're the only one who'll understand what he needs to confess. He won't tell me anything more, but he's insistent. His name is Samuel Tornhawk. The name meant nothing to me, but something in my colleague's voice told me this was important. I made the drive up to Bellingham, my own pain barely controlled by medication, to meet Samuel Tornhawk. He was 91 years old, the oldest patient I'd ever seen. Full-blooded Quinault, he told me, from a family that had lived in the Olympic Peninsula for 10,000 years. He was dying of old age, his body simply wearing out, and he wanted to share something his grandfather had passed down to him 80 years earlier. Samuel's room had a window overlooking the bay, and he spent most of his time staring out at the water. When I entered, he turned to look at me with eyes that were clouded with cataracts but still sharp with intelligence. You're the chaplain who keeps secrets, he said. It wasn't a question. I am, I replied. How did you know to ask for me? Because the spirits told me, he said simply, and because I've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who understands that some truths need to be witnessed, but not spread. He gestured for me to sit. My grandfather told me this story when I was 11 years old in 1943. He was dying then, just as I'm dying now, and he made me promise to keep the secret until I was old and ready to pass. That time is now. Samuel settled back in his bed. My people have always known about the forest people. That's what we call them, the forest people, the ancient ones. We don't call them Sasquatch. That's a white man's word, a corruption of our language. To us, they are brothers, older brothers, who chose a different path. Our creation stories tell of a time when all people were one. But then came a choice. Some chose to walk the path of fire, of tools and villages and agriculture. Those became us, the tribes, the first peoples. Others chose to walk the path of the forest, of living in harmony with the trees and animals, of remaining pure and untouched by change. Those became the forest people. "We've always known they were there," Samuel said. "We would leave offerings for them at the edges of our territories. They would leave gifts for us. When our hunters got lost, the forest people would guide them home. When children wandered too far, the forest people would watch over them. We had an understanding, a treaty older than memory. But then the white men came," he continued, and his voice grew heavy with sadness. "They came with their guns and their greed and their certainty that they owned the world. They cut the trees, killed the animals, took the land. And when they heard our stories about the forest people, they laughed, said we were primitive, superstitious, said these beings didn't exist. So the forest people went deeper into hiding, and we stopped speaking about them to outsiders. We kept the treaty of silence because we understood that the white man's knowledge would mean the forest people's death." My grandfather, Samuel said, was a healer. He knew the old ways, the plant medicines, the sacred songs. And in 1942, something happened that tested the treaty in ways we'd never imagined. A forest person came to our village, came right up to the edge of the clearing in daylight and called out. My grandfather heard the call and understood. One of them was sick, dying, and they were asking for help. Grandfather gathered his medicines and followed the forest person into the wilderness. He was gone for 6 days. When he came back, he was changed. Quiet, thoughtful, carrying a weight he'd never had before. He wouldn't speak about what he'd seen, not even to the elders. But years later, when he knew death was coming, he told me. Samuel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The forest people had a village, Grandfather said. A real village, hidden in a valley so remote no white man had ever found it. Maybe 30 or 40 of them living there. They had shelters made of woven cedar bark, fire pits, drying racks for meat and fish. They had tools, not metal, but stone and bone, sophisticated and well-made. They had art, carvings, and paintings on the rock walls of their valley, and they were dying. A sickness had come to them, Grandfather said, something they'd never encountered before. A respiratory infection, probably influenza or something similar, brought by contact with white loggers who'd been pushing deeper into the forest. The forest people had no immunity. It was killing them. Grandfather worked for 6 days, using every medicine he knew. Yarrow for fever, elderberry for the lungs, willow bark for pain. He taught them how to make healing teas, how to create steam baths to clear the airways. He saved some of them, but 11 died, including several children. He helped them perform death rituals, sang the sacred songs with them, witnessed their grief. And here's what broke Grandfather's heart, Samuel said. They thanked him. Even as they buried their dead, even as their people were dying from a sickness brought by our kind, they thanked him. They gave him gifts, sacred objects from their people. They showed him trust that he felt he didn't deserve. Before he left, their elder, a female who'd lived more than 80 winters, spoke to him. My grandfather said she spoke in a mixture of Kino and her own language, but he understood her meaning. She said their people had a decision to make. They could stay hidden and slowly die out, their numbers too small to survive, or they could reveal themselves to the white men and hope for mercy, for protection, for a chance to live openly. Grandfather begged her not to reveal themselves. He told her the white men would not show mercy. They would capture, study, kill, exploit. He told her the only safety was in remaining myth, in staying invisible. And she listened. She believed him, and she made the choice to keep her people hidden, knowing it might mean eventual extinction, but hoping that someday, maybe generations in the future, humanity would grow wise enough to accept them. Samuel looked at me with those clouded eyes. That was 81 years ago, Robert, and my grandfather's warning was right. Look at what we've done to every species we've discovered. Either we kill them, or we put them in zoos, or we destroy their habitat until they disappear anyway. The forest people's choice to stay hidden was an act of survival, not mystery. Do they still exist? I asked quietly. Samuel was silent for a long time. Then he said, I've seen them 3 times in my life. Once when I was a teenager, once in my 40s, once in my 70s. Each time there were fewer. The last time I saw one, it was alone. A male, old and gray, standing at the edge of a clear-cut forest, looking at what we'd done to his home. He saw me watching, and we stood there for maybe a minute, just looking at each other across that destroyed land. And then he turned and walked away, into what little forest remained. I think they're almost gone, Robert. I think we're witnessing the end of a people who survived for thousands of years, only to be erased not by violence, but by our indifference. We didn't hunt them to extinction. We just took their world away, piece by piece, until there was nowhere left for them to hide. What do you want me to do with this story? I asked. Bear witness, Samuel said simply. That's all. Know that they existed. Know that they were real, that they were intelligent, that they were kind. And when you die, when you cross over, carry that knowledge with you. Let it become part of the sacred memory, the truth that exists beyond words and proof and scientific validation. Samuel Tornhawk died 2 days later. In his final hours, he sang songs in Kino, old songs that his grandfather had taught him, songs that, he told me, the forest people had taught his ancestors hundreds of years ago. Music that bridged 2 peoples who had lived in parallel for millennia. And now I'm dying too. The cancer has spread faster than the doctors expected. I have perhaps 2 months left, maybe less. And I've spent these final weeks thinking about the 5 men who trusted me with their secrets. Thomas, who was saved by a wounded Sasquatch and spent his life protecting the forest where they lived. Malcolm, who witnessed the murder of a gentle creature and never forgave his species for it. David, who saw them save lives and was forced to deny what he'd witnessed. Raymond, who chose silence over scientific glory to protect a dying people. And Samuel, who carried the sacred knowledge of his ancestors and passed it to me with his last breaths. 5 confessions, 5 perspectives, 5 pieces of a truth that most of the world will never accept. But I accept it. I know it's real. I've seen the patterns, the consistency across decades and witnesses. These beings exist. They're intelligent. They're compassionate, and they're nearly gone. Raymond's encrypted files remain locked in my safe deposit box. In my will, I've left instructions for them to be destroyed unopened when I die. Not because the evidence isn't real, but because Samuel was right. Bearing witness is enough. Some truths don't need to be proven. They just need to be known, held sacred, protected from the exploitation that proof would bring. I think about that elder Samuel's grandfather met, choosing invisibility over extinction, choosing to let her people fade into myth rather than risk the cruelty of human knowledge. It was a terrible choice, but probably the right one. We've proven time and time again that we can't be trusted with the vulnerable, with the different, with the extraordinary. The forest people made their choice. They chose to remain hidden, to live in the gaps and shadows of our expanding world, to prioritize survival over recognition. And now, as I approach my own end, I'm making a choice too. I'm choosing to honor their sacrifice by keeping their secret, even as I share these stories, because that's what these 5 confessions taught me. The most profound truths aren't always meant to be shouted from rooftops, or published in journals, or proven with photographs. Sometimes the most profound truths are meant to be whispered from dying lips to listening ears, passed down like sacred knowledge, held gently in the hearts of those who understand that protection means silence. I'll die in a few weeks. The hospice where I spent my career helping others face death is now caring for me in my final days. It's strange being on this side of the experience, but also fitting. I've heard so many last words, so many deathbed confessions. Now I'm making my own. To anyone who finds this recording, if anyone ever does, I want you to know that I believe every word the 5 men told me. I believe Thomas when he said a Bigfoot saved his life. I believe Malcolm when he said he photographed a mother and child. I believe David when he said they rescued a family from a bear attack. I believe Raymond when he said they have culture and language and intelligence. I believe Samuel when he said there are brothers who chose a different path. And I'm asking you, whoever you are, to make the same choice I'm making. Keep the secret, protect the mystery. Let them live in shadow and myth, because that shadow is the only protection they have left. Don't go looking for them. Don't try to prove they exist. Don't turn their sanctuary into a spectacle. Just know, just believe, just honor the fact that somewhere in the deepest forests, in the most remote mountains, in the places we haven't yet destroyed, there might still be a few forest people living their quiet, gentle lives. And the greatest gift we can give them is our ignorance, our doubt, our willingness to let them remain unknown. 5 men trusted me with the truth. Now I'm trusting you with the same burden. These beings are real, they're dying, and our silence might be the only thing that gives them a chance to survive a little longer. That's my confession. That's my deathbed truth. I lived with this knowledge for 26 years, carrying the weight of 5 men's stories. And now, as I prepare to follow them into whatever comes next, I'm passing that weight to you. Protect them by doubting them. Save them by denying them. Love them by leaving them alone. That's what they've been begging us to do for thousands of years. Maybe finally we can honor that request. My name is Robert Chen. I was a hospice chaplain for 35 years. I heard 5 deathbed confessions about Sasquatch, and every word was true. And now, as I face my own end, I'm confessing to you what they confessed to me. Not because the world needs to know, but because someone needs to remember. The forest people are real. They're dying. And the most human thing we can do is let them die in peace, on their own terms, in the places they've called home since before we learned to write their names. That's the truth. That's the confession. And now it's yours to carry, just as I've carried it, just as Thomas and Malcolm and David and Raymond and Samuel carried it before me. We're the keepers of the secret, the protectors of the myth, the guardians of a truth too important to prove. And maybe, in the end, that's the most chilling revelation of all. Not that Bigfoot exists, but that we've known all along, and we've chosen silence over salvation, secrecy over protection, myth over recognition, because deep down, we know what would happen if we admitted the truth. We know what we do to the vulnerable and the different and the extraordinary. The forest people know too. That's why they're hiding. That's why they're dying in silence. They've watched us for thousands of years, and they understand us better than we understand ourselves. 5 men lived with that knowledge. 5 men died protecting it. And now I'm joining them, carrying this secret into whatever comes after this life ends. The forest people are real. Remember that. Honor that. And then, for their sake, forget you ever knew it. Let the myth remain myth. Let the mystery remain mysterious. Let the shadows stay dark and deep and full of possibilities, because that's where they live. That's where they've always lived. And if we love them at all, that's where we'll let them stay.